Hello and welcome. My mic is all the way on the other side of the room. Let me bring that in. Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Driver's Debrief. I'm your host, Nicholas Patty. Happy Monday. We have a lot to talk about today. Not actually as much as we've had in episodes past. But this episode, there seems to be a lot of news, a lot of transfers, a lot of driver announcements, testing, all sorts of rumors and everything. So we're going to be diving into that. We have a new car to talk about that's obviously fan favorite, but it's also my favorite. We have F1 at Las Vegas. We're going to briefly touch on Porsche Endurance Cup at COTA, and we're going to briefly touch on the South Carolina 400. But before we jump into all that, if you're watching this here on X, welcome to the live stream. And while you're here, please follow, like some of the tweets. But we post every day, and we're covering a variety of news. We repost news as it's breaking so that you don't miss out on anything. So a lot of this content is pulled from what we've already kind of curated on social media. So make sure to follow on X. But also, if you're watching this on playback here on YouTube or Rumble, please follow, subscribe, like the video, and comment. We're going to have a few portions of this episode where there's going to be some kind of discussion questions. So make sure to share your thoughts, what you think of those topics on X. So let's jump into it then. So we're going to jump off in car corner. We have a new car to talk about, folks. And it is a long-awaited, I say a long-awaited, maybe a year. But it's something that we were excited about, the Manthey GT3RS. Now, cast your mind back to when this 992 GT3RS was debuted. It was really the most extreme, aerodynamic, efficient, maximized use of a Porsche, of an existing platform that I can think of in Porsche history. Obviously, you have the GT3 Rennsport, but that's not kind of an existing 911 platform. That's a different tub. Everything is totally different from the road-going cars. And I don't just mean different, but I mean like fundamentally seam welds in the roll cage and the tub. Everything. It's not the same as a GT3 or a 911 in any regard. And it's also not street legal, but the GT3RS of the 992 generation was really this step into just extremes. I was going to say extremities, but just extremes. Extreme aero. Obviously, the motor is mildly revised, but it's for the most part the same 4-liter that we have in the regular GT3. But aero components, I mean, and not just the fact that it has a lot of aero, but the ways in which you sacrifice use of other parts of the car for track performance. So there is no frunk because of all the airflow that's channeled from the front radiator area up through where the frunk would normally be, out of the hood and over the car. So it was really something that, it was an extreme that Porsche had never done before. Normally, Manthey is the one that takes a very track-focused Porsche and makes it completely extreme, but Manthey had to start from a car that was very, very single-use oriented and try to make it even more focused on that single use, which is track driving. So I'm going to read from the Porsche newsroom just because they go into details about this. So a lot of this is in communist, and by that I just mean it's in European. No miles per hour or downforce numbers in any metrics that we're used to. But let me just go ahead and read. I'll read this quickly. It's a lot, but I'll read this quickly. Extensive aerodynamic component changes. It has a new spoiler lip with a new wing profile on the front and rear. It has redesigned wheel arch gurney flaps, 2 dive planes on each side of the front bumper, a new spoiler lip that increases downforce on the front axle. The rear window is replaced by a 25% lighter carbon fiber panel, on top of which is a carbon fiber shark fin for aero. The fin was derived from the 963 to increase cornering stability. It has 6 additional roof fins, but it diverts all that warm output air from the front radiator outwards. to keep cold air coming over. So basically, you have all the warm air that's kind of come through that front radiator coming out on the hood. That air is going to travel up over the roof. Those fins on the roof direct the air outwards so that hot air doesn't get into the intake sitting over the rear of the car, and that it'll focus on getting cool air into it, which I think is super cool. It's got a split carbon fiber DRS wing element with larger redesigned end plates that are increasing downforce on the rear axle. It's got a widened rear diffuser with larger carbon fiber strakes. It's increasing downforce without increasing air resistance. It's got carbon fiber aero disc wheel covers on the rear, again, for less drag. The overall downforce has been increased without increasing drag at 285 kilometers an hour, which I think is 160, 180. I think it's closer to 180. The GT3RS with Manthey kit produces more than 1,000 kilograms of downforce. Here's some suspension upgrades. The spring rates of the semi-active coilovers have been adjusted for higher downforce. The spring rates were increased by 30% on the front axle and 15% on the rear. 4-wheel and 3-body acceleration sensors, along with a new control unit, ensure fully automatic damper tuning, which is even more precise than what Porsche did from the factory. New shock absorbers with 2 separate valves for compression and rebound are independently controlled. All sorts of stuff. Let's move to some of the brake upgrades. The braking components are tailored to track driving. The steel sheathed brake lines provide an even more direct pedal feel and faster response time. Optional racing brake pads are available for cars with the composite carbon kit from Porsche. The pads are specifically developed for track driving, reduced fading, and increased responsiveness and controlled precision. They have a more consistent performance over a wider temperature range and good wear resistance over the stock brake pads. Whew, that was a lot. But that is to say that this isn't just, okay, slightly larger. Anything that involves this car moving around a track that doesn't have to deal with horsepower has been touched, upgraded, and modified. I'm not going to lie, I think the Manthey GT3 kit is kind of goofy. You're taking a car that you already know isn't supposed to be the RS, right? The extreme, pure track driving machine, and trying to make it better, when in reality, you could just go buy a stock RS and it's going to be better than a GT3 Manthey, as opposed to a GT3RS Manthey, which is, again, more extreme than anything Porsche is going to do. Granted, Manthey is owned by Porsche, so it's kind of like a Porsche Plus, but obviously it's not just something you buy from the factory. You get it done by Manthey. So, okay. Let's move into the cool down room for all of our motorsports news, and we have about a page and a half. A page and a half of motorsports news. So let's get into that. So we're just going to start. We're going to start big. It's basically been confirmed. Dramatic pause. Also, we're repping our old TRG Aston Martin IMSA mug. So shout out to TRG and Aston Martin. So the cool down room. It's been all but confirmed that Cadillac is joining F1 in 2026. So I don't know if this was leaked, but basically all the major reporting outlets are talking about how it's basically been internally confirmed that now that Andretti is not part of the program, that GM is going to be allowed to join the team, which I think really just reveals the arrogance and pettiness of the Formula One paddock, is the fact that a storied F1 name like Andretti and a storied team isn't allowed to compete, but you're perfectly fine with that exact same program competing as long as it's not Andretti. I think that's ridiculous. But beyond that, General Motors is going to be in Formula One in 2026. They're going to be using a Ferrari engine for 2026, 2027. And then they're going to have their own power plant in 2028. I kind of jokingly told myself, oh, well, this is because they're waiting for the F1 regs to change where they can shove a naturally aspirated V8 in it. But this leads me to my kind of first conversation piece, which is going to be driver lineup ideas. Who do we think Cadillac could bring on as a driver to race in Formula 1? I kind of half jokingly, because it would be almost terrorism on the F1 paddock, said that I want Scott Dixon and Pippo Durrani, but I kind of seriously want Scott Dixon and Pippo. Put Scott Dixon in there for a year or two to be the veteran driver, open wheel, bring some stability to that program. And then put Pippo Durrani in there because he just does not give a shit, dude. Pippo would drive the absolute... I'm having shades of Petit Le Mans WTR versus Whelen Action Express, but in an F1 context. Like Max Verstappen and Pippo Durrani on the same grid would just... art. Cinema. Haas has announced Courtney Crone will drive for their F1 Academy team. Courtney Crone's been doing a lot of IMSA stuff. She was an IMSA diverse driver initiative. They have a scholarship for people of different backgrounds to get the driver scholarship. So she was the winner of that a few years ago in IMSA. She's been doing GT4 stuff. She did some LMP3 racing in Europe. I've met Courtney at Radford. She was awesome. Super, super cool. So congratulations to her. Another American driving on the international stage. So we'll keep an eye on that. Similarly, in the same vein, the F1 Academy calendar has been confirmed. Shanghai, Jeddah, Miami, Montreal, Zandvoort, Singapore, and Las Vegas, which I would love to know, why are almost all of them horrible street circuits? Jeddah sucks, Miami sucks, Singapore used to be good, but the cars are too big, which I guess F1 Academy, they're smaller, but still, and then Las Vegas. Not a fan. Put them on real tracks. Send F1 Academy to Road Atlanta. Let's have some fun. Huge news for those of us that grew up, or haven't grown up for that matter, Lego and F1. So this week, Lego and Formula One announced a huge collaboration. This has got to be on launch, on debut, the largest collection of Legos I think we've seen. Like when Star Wars or Indiana Jones or any other Lego or intellectual properties join Lego, it's typically a smaller debut or a smaller release, but this is massive. So there's 18 sets of toys, like individual Lego sets, some of which are a collector's pack that comes with all 10 teams. You get one of every car on the grid. Mini cars, where it's a tiny little, it's like those mini Star Wars fighters, where it's not to scale with the minifigure, but then you also have pieces of art like was it 92, 91, Red 5, Nigel Mansell's Williams. That car we're getting in the I don't know what scale or I don't know what the Lego terminology is, but it's like the Senna McLaren that they did, but it's Mansell's Red 5. So that's going to be awesome. Definitely going to get that. More F1 news. Yuki, well, sort of. It's tangentially F1 related. Yuki Tsunoda is interested in running the Indy 500, and Max said he definitely is going to run the Rolex 24 at some point. This comes off the back of them doing a Honda Media Hybrid Heroes Day, where they had the ARX Acura prototype, they had the IndyCar, they had the Civic Type R TCR car, all sorts of stuff. And they were doing a big media day. Everybody's super excited. You had Colin Braun, Scott Dixon, Yuki Tsunoda, Max Verstappen, a bunch of people there that were part of the Red Bull and Honda family. And so Max got to drive the ARX. Yuki Tsunoda drove the IndyCar. And both of them obviously were happy about it because, again, you're on camera and it's your major OEM partner. But I would like to see actually both of them do both of those. Moving on to some NASCAR news, which I'm surprised we have as much as we do, but NASCAR, I think, takes up the largest chunk. NASCAR and sports cars take up most of this news. So the NASCAR Annual Award Banquet happened last week, obviously, with the end of the season. Saw the outgoing TRD president David Wilson win the Bill France Award for Excellence. Martin Truex Jr. has confirmed that he is running in the 2025 Daytona 500, but it won't be with 2311. He said, and I quote, "Joe Gibbs Racing is figuring it out." So I guess he's running with JGR, but we have yet to see what number, what car, what sponsors, all that sort of stuff. Richard Childress Racing has announced that Richard Boswell will be Austin Dillon's crew chief for 2025. Travis Mack was announced by Legacy Motor Club as the crew chief for John Hunter Nemechek in the number 42 car. Riley Herbst has joined Joe Gibbs Racing in the number 35 NASCAR Cup Series car. Obviously, Riley was in the Xfinity Series last year. RFK Racing adds a third full-time car with Ryan Preece behind the wheel. Obviously, he'll be racing alongside Christopher Buescher and Brad Keselowski. JTG Dougherty Racing, who I have a soft spot for, has been rebranded as Hyatt Motorsports, while the ownership and driver, obviously Ricky Stenhouse Jr., is remaining unchanged. Not quite sure. This one dropped out of nowhere. I was scrolling on X and saw a post from Hyatt Motorsports, and I was like, who the hell is this? Why am I following them? And I was like, wait a minute, this is JTG. What? So anyway, apparently they've just changed the name, and like the I think it was it Racer or Motorsport? Whoever did the article said it like literally same ownership. There's no, typically these name changes will happen when there's a new owner or a new investor or something, and they start to change some of the details of the team. None of that was there, so I don't know what happened or what caused that. Chris Gale will serve as Denny Hamlin's crew chief for next year as Chris Gabehart moves into a competition director role with Joe Gibbs Racing. And last on the NASCAR kick, NASCAR at COTA. Massive changes. NASCAR at COTA. So let's talk about it. Which I love and I hate Motorsports Twitter, Motorsports X. So you have a lot of people who've never been to COTA, never raced at COTA, never watched a race at COTA in person, who comment. And they just get the most basic details wrong. So the news is NASCAR, when it returns to COTA, is going to be running the national circuit, which for a lot of people who don't care about COTA or not into international motorsports have no idea what that is. The national circuit at COTA has you come through the S's, and then before you get to turn 7, rather than curving around to the right and then you climbing up the hill headed towards 11, it cuts through what normally serves as kind of a paddock or a staging area for the lower series that isn't the main paddock. And it dumps you, it's literally like a little chicane, and it dumps you onto the back straight about maybe 1,000 yards from turn 12. So this circuit was originally designed with the track paved, and it, like, in the first year or two of the track, it was being used. It was used for rallycross. It was used for V8 supercars the one time they came to COTA. So I strongly encourage anybody, even if you're not even against this COTA change layout, with how many people I've seen on X just be utterly uneducated about this, please go watch the V8 Supercars race at Circuit of the Americas. I think it was 2013. It's up on YouTube for free. It was a great race. The track layout is great. And you have a lot of people saying, well, you're losing 2 or 3 of the best overtaking spots on the track. The only overtaking spot you're losing is turn 11. And the only overtaking that was happening in turn 11 is someone dive bombing, making contact, all the cars going out wide outside track limits onto the back straight. Not to mention you had the scary crash in the wet with Martin Truex 2 or 3 years ago on the back straight at COTA. 3 years ago. It was before the next gen car. So let's not even get into debating kind of the layout. What this does, and it does well, one, it makes the laps go by quicker, which is good for a few reasons. Not because NASCAR isn't fun to watch, but you get more laps. On top of that, you get less time for the tires to quote unquote cool down. So this would be, rather than being able to let everything cool down on the back straight, you're going to be working harder because there is no time to rest around the track. On the back straight, you can genuinely relax. You can take a hand off the wheel, you can look in the mirror, you can look around. You're on it for a while. You don't get that now. Additionally, all the safety car and yellow flag procedures are now shortened. All the cautions are shortened because it's less time all the way up, all the way down on the track since it's a shorter lap. So that should mean that all the brakes, the stage brakes, all the stuff during the race goes by much, much quicker, which I'm a fan of, because that, if you're going to have stage brakes like they announced that they would for road courses, I don't want it to take as long. And quite frankly, you're taking away parts of the track that the Cup cars aren't good at either, which is very sharp hairpin corners and medium high speed extended duration corners, which would be the latter part of the S's, right? So I think it's a great idea. That part of the track was designed specifically for these types of cars. I remind you, V8 supercars. The full track was always kind of the bigger level of motors, F1 and MotoGP and stuff like that. So I think it's cool. The national circuit's got very little use. I think it's cool because it'll potentially tease or open up the idea for other series who maybe wouldn't have come to COTA to come try it now that they kind of are using but also aware again that this national circuit exists at COTA. So I think it's going to be great. I'm going to go watch it. And there were literally people on X who said, well, now I'm not going to go to COTA to watch NASCAR. And it's like, if you're not going to go to COTA to watch NASCAR because of a slight circuit alteration, then might I recommend you're not a fan of NASCAR in the first place? That's ridiculous. You're not going to go watch a race because the track is a little bit different, but then I'll enjoy your beers for you at the NASCAR race. Like, give me a break. It drives me up the wall because there's such bigger issues to worry about with NASCAR, and this is what people are focused on. Moving off of NASCAR to better racing. McLaren has announced that Ian James is their new director of motorsport. He will oversee all the customer racing programs and McLaren's automotive GT cars. That's effective December 1st. For 2025, IMSA has split GTD and GTD Pro classes. They will have separate qualifying sessions, will be split on the grid, and be treated separate during safety car and yellow flag procedures. Aston Martin, the heart of racing, has confirmed the first two drivers of their 2025 World Endurance Championship campaign. Harry Ticknell will be in the 007 car, and Alex Riberas will be in the 009. We got to talk about how gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, that Aston Martin Valkyrie is. That car is stunning, regardless of livery. That car is stunning. The sound, immaculate. I am a third generation Porsche Club member. My family has raced Porsches for as long as I've been alive. I've got, photos of Porsches that my parents and grandparents have raced. It is tried and true. I am about as Porsche as they get. I got Porsche Club of America Pumas sitting off camera here. But my dad just bought a V12 Vantage, and I'm a Fernando fan, Aston Martin F1. Might have to cheer for the Valkyrie. I'm going to be honest. I think I'm going to be split between, as long as Aston Martin or Porsche win, I'm happy, because for the first time, listen, the Valkyrie is the coolest car in IMSA. It's the coolest car in sports cars, period. Bar none. So I hope it does well. I hope it's competitive. Speaking of competitive or not, Lamborghini is pausing all World Endurance Championship efforts across Hypercar and GT to focus on the Tamario GT3 Lamborghini development, but they will continue to compete in IMSA with the SE63 and the Huracan GT3 car. The Iron Dames has announced that Karen Gaillard, I apologize, it's a French name, becomes the first woman to win the Porsche Junior Shootout and secures a spot in Porsche Carrera Cup France. Team WRT is fielding a four-car effort in World Endurance Championship for 2025 with their two hypercars and their two M4 GT3s. The 2025 World Endurance Championship entry list has been revealed with 36 full-time entries. We have 18 in LMGT3 and 18 in hypercar. Robert Kubica remains as the third driver in the number 83A, of course, a Ferrari 499P. Iron Dames has also announced that they are moving to Manthey Racing's Porsche team for next year in World Endurance Championship. Drivers will be Michelle Gadding, who's returning, Rahel Frey, who's returning, but then a new driver, we announced this 2 or 3 weeks ago, Celia Martin, because Sarah Bovey has been upgraded to a silver driver rating. So for all the World Endurance Championship and IMSA driver ratings, they basically, if they are determined they want to run in a particular category, they have to change around their driver pairings or driver combinations so that they can stay in that class within the parameters of that rating system. But what's huge about this is Iron Dames was racing 2 or 3 years ago in a Porsche, did well in the RSR, won some races, was always in the fight for pole, was a contender for World Endurance Not GT3. Holy shit! I've totally lost my mind. Yeah, whatever the GT class was before LMGT3, and I've already forgotten. I know it was the RSR. I just can't remember the name of the class. So anyway, I can't believe I've just completely blanked on that. That all being said, Iron Dames was very competitive in that car. When it moved to GT3, they were running the Lamborghini in ELMS, I believe. So they decided that they're going to do the Lamborghini in their select IMSA and WEC competitions. Did not go well. So they've announced that they're coming back to Porsche, but they're not just coming back to Porsche. They're running with the factory team. Like, they're running with Manthey, who's the reigning WEC champions. And say what you want about Iron Dames or Iron Lynx or Rahel Frey always getting into other cars. They are a serious championship contender now that this is the case. Bar none. So let's move into other sports car news. Ben Barnicoat is moving from IMSA. He was racing with Vassar Sullivan in the Lexus over to World Endurance Championship. He's going to be replacing Kelvin van der Linde in the Akotis ASP Lexus. Big news from Germany. Mercedes is returning to Le Mans for the first time since 1999 as part of a GT3 World Endurance Championship campaign. They're going to be running that with Iron Lynx. Moving on to MotoGP, KTM has stated that regardless of all their financial woes, they're not expecting or working with Red Bull to save them from these current issues and reassert their desire to race in MotoGP. Obviously, Red Bull's a title sponsor with KTM and their MotoGP program, so this would be, hey, KTM, financial issues are stacking up against you. Maybe Red Bull buys you out. And KTM saying, no way, no how. We're competing regardless. Moving into IndyCar news, Stingray Robb has signed with Juncos Hollinger Racing for 2025. Michael Strahan will be the pace car driver for the Indy 500 in 2025 in the brand new Corvette ZR1. NHRA news, Tony Stewart is the NHRA Rookie of the Year, and then WRC expands its Toyota expands its WRC driver lineup for 2025, and they're going to be entering and fielding 5 cars in 2025 in WRC. Okay, so just now, 30 minutes in, we've gotten through the car corner and the cool down room. Time to jump into, we're probably just going to do F1. Let's jump into the results from F1 in Sin City. We had Pierre Gasly DNF, Alexander Albon DNF, both from mechanical failures. In 18th, we had Valtteri Bottas. In 17th, Esteban Ocon. In 16th, Liam Lawson. 15th, Lance Stroll. 14th, Franco Colapinto. 13th was Guan Yu Zhou. 12th was Kevin Magnussen. 11th was Fernando Alonso. 10th, Sergio Perez. 9th, Yuki Tsunoda. 8th, Nico Hulkenberg. 7th, Oscar Piastri. 6th, Lando Norris. 5th, Max Verstappen. 4th, Charles Leclerc. 3rd, Carlos Sainz. And then a Mercedes 1-2 with George Russell winning and Lewis Hamilton in second. It was an interesting race, and we have a lot to talk about from it, obviously. So Max Verstappen is your 2024 Formula One World Champion. He joins a rarefied group of drivers to win 4 championships in a row, but also just 4 championships, period. Obviously, Alain Prost and Sebastian Vettel being the other 2 drivers to retire with 4 World Drivers' Championships to their name. Max obviously fought through the season. I'm going to save, though, if you're watching this on X or YouTube or Rumble, follow, like the video, subscribe. But I'm going to save our big F1 season review for a separate episode when the season's over. So we'll get into kind of the records, the storylines, the feature pieces of the season at large for that episode. We're going to kind of focus on this race for this episode. So let's start with some Ferrari drama. So Charles Leclerc is the veneer of him being the calm, cool, collected, I'm just here to be everybody's friend is starting to crack. It's starting to fall apart. So Charles, after the race, really tore into his Ferrari team about how they handled him and Carlos, but also Carlos's behavior on track. because Carlos apparently doesn't have the best interest of the team at heart. Well, Carlos's team abandoned him and picked toward the end of his career driver, Lewis Hamilton, not taking anything away from him. Lewis is as skilled as any of the drivers in the field, if not more. He is as competitive as any of the drivers in the field, if not more. I'm not taking anything away from him, but Lewis's shelf life, well, I shouldn't say that because that's what Sky Sports has been saying, and I'm not trying to say what they're saying. Lewis is 39 years old, okay? There's only so much longer he's going to be driving. Ferrari picked him over a driver in his early 30s, Carlos Sainz, who has, if he wanted, easily another 5 or 10 years in his career left. They picked Lewis over Carlos. Why would Carlos do anything to help Ferrari? They punted him to the curb. And Carlos didn't even know up until the deal had been signed. It wasn't like, hey, Carlos, we're thinking about contract negotiations. Let's talk this back. It was, hey, Carlos, we've signed Lewis. Thanks for your service. So first off, let's think of the best way to attack this. Carlos had to swap positions with Leclerc earlier in the race. And then Leclerc at the end of the race says, Carlos, it's just a matter of respect. It's just a matter of respect. Charles said that he was effed over by the team. He's tired of being the nice guy, blah, blah, blah. Carlos has always yielded when the team has asked him to. If you're watching this and you disagree, link in the comments where Carlos denied team orders other than this race. The times that Carlos has fought with Leclerc has been when the team has said, y'all are free to fight, just don't take each other out. So sure, Carlos has battled with Leclerc in their time at Ferrari, but at no time has it been at the expense of team orders. Not to mention, this race, it would have been Charles third, Sainz fourth, or Sainz third, Leclerc fourth. In terms of the team game, it's completely the same. It doesn't affect the team at all. Leclerc is pissed because he's not getting more points. Leclerc isn't being the Ferrari driver that's finishing on the podium. If Leclerc cared about the team, it wouldn't matter who finishes where as long as the team is getting the most average points throughout the race weekend. This weekend, if Carlos would have followed team orders, the team would have gotten the same amount of points that they did if Carlos didn't follow team orders. And at this rate, Carlos has 3 races left, now 2, where he has the opportunity to potentially be on the podium or win a race before he never has a chance for the rest of his career. Williams is not going to be a podium team. They're not going to be a race-winning team. Even if they're getting top 10s, they're not going to be that team. So Carlos is looking down the barrel of his career being dead at a team that never prioritized him when he has had almost as many wins as Leclerc. He's been just as competitive, writ large, as Leclerc has been in the same few-year period, winning races against drivers who were faster and better in better cars than he was. The only time Leclerc had a jump on Carlos was beginning of 2022. But 2023 and 2024, Carlos has had the measure of Leclerc. I don't care what anybody says. So you're now saying that the team screws you over all the time, Charles? For a driver that's been, even at best, marginally better than Carlos, you've gotten every single 50-50 decision going your way on the team side. Not to mention the fact Carlos wanted to come in and box. Carlos wanted to come in and box. Carlos wanted to come in and box. They wouldn't let him, and then when they do call him in, they're not ready for him. They tell him to stay out, which I think should have been a penalty on him, but it was the team's blunder. Charles, and I've said this from the get-go, since he is Ferrari's golden boy, he got the largest contract in terms of year duration in the history of the team in Formula One. He feels entitled to everything at Ferrari. You now have arguably the best, driver of all time in Formula One, who comes with the most marketing dollars, the most goodwill behind him. Like, you have Lewis Hamilton, who has everything going for him, searching for a championship that he feels was robbed from him, going to a team because he wants to be more competitive. Lewis only has a few years left. Do you think he's going to yield those years to Charles? Do you think Lewis Hamilton is going to say, you know what, Charles? You're the number one. I forgot. you're the king of Ferrari, you're the king of Italy or whatever. This stupid Charles fan accounts on Twitter always talk about. Oh, our king, our savior of Italy or whatever. Lewis Hamilton is going to come in with one thing in mind, and it's winning. It'll come at the expense of Charles. It'll come at the expense of Ferrari. It doesn't matter. He will go for the wins, which he should. It's called racing. When has Lewis ever been a good number two? Never. Never. McLaren, he was number one. McLaren with Alonso, they butted heads a lot. He was number one. Jenson Button McLaren, he was number one. Mercedes, 2013, 14, 15, 16. He was not willing to sit down and be number two to Nico Rosberg. And it's not just that he won't be a number two to a bad driver. He won't be a number two to a driver that went on to win the world championship. Okay? Lewis won't be a number two for anybody. And he shouldn't. This isn't a bad thing, right? Bottas, number two. Russell, they started to butt heads. Lewis was still the number one, even though, again, the last 2 years, George Russell has consistently outperformed Lewis Hamilton. Consistently, okay? So, moving to Ferrari, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think Lewis is going to be a number two? Absolutely not. So Charles needs to get right. He needs to figure out what he wants from his career. He needs to figure out how he's going to handle himself, because Lewis ain't going to be a number two. Ferrari potentially is going to be in a position where they can fight for a driver's championship next year or the following year. Red Bull, not on the decline, but not 2023 dominant. And it's another year next year, the same regulations, so that the other teams have a chance to catch up. You're going to potentially have a three-way world championship between Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull. And by championship, I mean drivers, not constructors. You're going to have Lando, Max, and then potentially Lewis and Leclerc. So if Leclerc feels like he's getting screwed over now, from Carlos Sainz, who is so polite and level-headed, just wait. So anyway, I think Charles is a crybaby. I think he needs to get over himself. I think put Charles with Lewis at 2007 McLaren or with Fernando at 2007 McLaren. Charles would have combusted. He would have just broken down crying. So I don't feel any sympathy for him. Charles has never just rolled over and done what's better for the team, because for him, he's always gotten the priority, right? So why would he? And then let's move on to some other. Just briefly, because I hate Alpine with a furious passion for what they did to Fernando, and then saying, yeah, he's washed up, we're gonna dump him. Pierre Gasly. Guys, let's never take Alpine seriously, okay? Pierre Gasly puts it third. Everybody's celebrating. What did it get you? What did it get you? Pierre Gasly was complaining of no power. The team goes, everything looks fine on our end, as they're sitting there eating a croissant, smoking a cigarette. And then the camera cuts to Pierre Gasly, and there's smoke billowing out of the back of the car. And the team's like, everything looks fine to us. No. In fact, it wasn't. There was a loss of power. The motor blew. But hey, I guess they won't have to worry, because they're going to Mercedes next year anyway. Or 2026. And then the last thing on F1 is, let's talk about, obviously, this is kind of bigger picture championship review stuff, but Max Verstappen's legacy kind of compared to Sebastian Vettel's legacy kind of as it sits. Because obviously they both went on and won 4 championships in a row on the bounce with Red Bull each. And listen, I'm a Fernando Alonso fan, tried and true my entire life. But his comments about this, I thought, were actually kind of off base, saying that Max's means more because Max had more competition than Vettel did, which I think is wrong. I think 2021 and this year were Max's toughest seasons, but Vettel had 2010 and 2012 where it came down to the wire, the last race against Fernando. So I'm not quite sure why he was saying that. And on top of that, Vettel is still the youngest World Drivers' champion of all time, and then he went on to win 4 of them. So he did it earlier in his career than Max did, even though Max started much younger than Vettel did in terms of his actual career in Formula One. So I'm not, again, quite sure where Fernando says that. But what do y'all think? Sebastian Vettel has was dominant, but the other thing that Fernando's not taking into account is Sebastian Vettel had a much better teammate to compete against than Max did. Okay, Max and Sergio, the closest Sergio's been was 2021, 2022. Mark Webber was always getting top fives, right? I mean, if he was not on the podium with Vettel, he was just off the podium. He only won, I think, Webber finished with 8 or 10 race wins in his career. Sergio's at 6, 7, so Webber's had more race wins. But Vettel didn't only have to fight against Fernando in a Ferrari or Lewis in a McLaren. He also had to fight against Webber, who was a much better driver, or more competitive driver rather than Sergio Perez was in that number 2 seat at Red Bull. So I think Fernando's off his rocker on that one. But let me know, between Max and Vettel, who do we think? Obviously, Max has got more wins, but there's more races in the calendar than there was when Vettel was racing. But what do we think? What do we think, Sebastian Vettel or Max Verstappen? I think if Max finishes at 4 championships, I think realistically we have to look at them about the same in terms of their legacy and their effect on the sport. If Max goes on to win 5... If Max wins 5, I think even though he has less championships, you have to talk about him in the category of Schumacher and Hamilton. Because again, not that the championships mean less, but the 7 that Lewis had and the 7 that Schumi had, there were more years of uncontested dominance than Max has had so far. Max has had 2, 2022 and 2023. So 50% of his championships, which I guess you could say about the same ratio for Lewis and Schumi. And by Lewis, I just mean 17, 18, 19. Those 3 relatively not competitive. Again, I know Sebastian was in the Ferrari, was kind of, I mean, he was always second, but it wasn't really coming down to the wire. Nobody really thought Vettel could go win the championship in the Ferrari, just because Ferrari always screws everything up. So that being said, I've rambled. I've talked, I've discussed, I've dissected, I've dived, I've delved. I've delved. Please let me know what you think, though. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on Rumble, on playback, or if you're watching this broadcast on X, reply. Let me know what you think about some of these kind of conversation points, and what you think in terms of Max Verstappen's legacy, but also the drama at Ferrari, what that's going to look like next year. I'd be eager to see what you all think of those programs going forward. But make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Rumble, follow here on X so you don't miss a single episode of the Driver's Debrief. We're going to be doing some special episodes as we approach the off season. We already have sports car stuff ramping up for the new season. But next week, we're going to be talking about F1 at Qatar, at the Losail circuit. We're going to be talking about GT Challenge Europe at the Jeddah Corniche circuit for their Endurance Cup finale. We're going to have more racing to talk about next week. But I will see you all very soon. This has been episode 13 of the Driver's Debrief. I'll see you next time.